Everything stops working, by user theme old bottle. You've probably seen this 1,000 times, but it's still a fun story. I work in field services technology support, and recently upgraded a user from a desktop to a laptop and docking station setup. They called me after a few weeks. User, I need your help. When I undock the laptop, everything stops working. Me, what exactly stops working? When you undock from the network, you lose access to certain applications, share drive access, etc. User, no, everything stops working, everything. I need you to come take a look. I drop by their office. Their laptop is working fine, connected to an external monitor, mouse, and keyboard via the dock. They undock it and gesture wildly as the monitor goes black, bang on the keyboard and jiggle the mouse. User, see? Everything stops working. As politely as I could, I explained that the brain of his computer lived inside the laptop. Eventually I just gave them their old desktop back. I've had to explain to laptop users multiple times they don't have to worry, no files are stored in the monitor, the dock just connects them to accessories and the network, smiley face. If you don't understand hypervisors, don't use them. Like a pig on a tightrope, by user bag of wisdom. This happened a ways back. One of my guys was doing an install with a customer. We allow customers to bring your own server, which is a whole other ball of wax that I could go on and on about. Anyway, this particular customer wanted us to set up on a Hyper-V virtual machine. That's fine, I've done lots of Hyper-V deployments before my dumb ass got promoted. My employee finally reaches out. Boss, I've been racking my brain on this virtual machine and it just won't receive any connections from clients. So I hop onto his remote session. I'm checking for anything my guy missed. I'm getting really stumped. Try pinging, get a response. Try to test the actual ports we need with Telnet, nothing. My guy has spent a day and a half stuck with a system that won't talk to the clients. Finally I start digging in the Hyper-V console and checking the virtual switches. All of that looks good. Finally I fire up PowerShell on the host and do an IP protocol configuration /all. Then I notice it. The customer shared the vSwitch interfaces with the host, which normally wouldn't be a problem. Then decided to set the Windows Server interface to the exact same IP as the Linux guest. So I say in chat on the remote session. These IPs have to be different from guests. We had a good old-fashioned IP address conflict. Customer gives me two IPs that I can use. I set the host to these new address and voila, just as if by magic the VM in our software is happily communicating with clients. However, the customer had to be their own worst enemy. Before I could end my remote session, the customer reopens the network settings for the two interfaces. And begins setting the exact same IPs as the guest, again. I'm screaming at my monitor, what are you doing? Stop! I frantically flail my mouse over the remote window and start smacking ESC to put an end to this madness. I finally get on chat and say, hey, you're breaking it again. Setting the host to the same IP as a guest is just like having two physical machines with the same IP. I guess my second time telling him got through and the rest of the deployment went uneventful, but delayed. But DR customer admin didn't understand that virtual machines with bridged interfaces need unique IPs from their host. I didn't know how to react, by user unique 13. Hey all! I've lurked here for a while and I could share my personal story with you all. Background, I work in a computer shop. We sell new hardware/software, and set it up for customers if needed/wanted so they have less work. This story takes place about 4 to 5 years ago. Story. One day a man walked into the store and asked us to help renew all of his equipment for his office at home. I helped him pick out a new computer, monitor, keyboard and mouse, printer, and all needed cables. He then asked us to set everything up so he would only have to connect everything at home and start working. Of course I say no problem and we do the order. I set everything up after a few days without issue and inform the customer that his order is ready for pickup. He came by, paid in full, and left with everything. The next day the customer walks in with his computer. Customer, the computer doesn't work. Me, oh, that's surprising, it worked well for me while setting up, let me have a look. I connect the computer to one of our stations and turn it on and it all works well, no problem detected. Me, I'm not sure what to tell you sir, but this device is working fine. Customer, well I'm pretty sure when I go home now it won't work again. Me, I would hope not sir, but if it doesn't work we can gladly look into it again. Customers grabs his computer and heads home. The next day the customer returns and he brought everything with him that he bought, all the cables and accessories. Customer, it doesn't work. I tried everything but it does nothing. I think about it for a moment and then say. Me, okay sir, how about you hook everything up and show me what you do at home. Customer takes all of his stuff, hooks it all up to power and connects everything. Then he crosses his arms and looks at me. Customer, see. I'm telling you it doesn't work. I look at the customer and press the power button on the computer. The fans start to spin and you hear a beep and then there was a login screen on the monitor. The customer looks at me and says. Customer, well no one told me to do that. Apparently this man, who was about in his 40s, didn't know you need to turn on the computer. Yet he managed to drive a car to our shop 3 times, and most likely has a TV at home. My guess is that his car has been running since he tested it and his TV happened to turn on when it was plugged in and stayed on since. I didn't know how to react but just sent the customer on his way questioning if this was real or just a fever dream. TLDR, dude buys computer and a bunch of stuff from me but didn't know he had to turn it on. Printer problems, by userclick 1992. While serving in the military you meet some of the smartest and dumbest people on earth. While serving in a joint interface control cell my watch captain called me over to figure out why he couldn't print products for our upcoming commander's brief, so I open the devices menu under the control panel and realize his printer isn't mapped to his profile. I say sir, your computer can't see the printer, therefore you're unable to print. He promptly smacks my hand out of the way with confidence and turns his monitor in the direction of the printer asking can it see it now? This man, well above my pay grade at the time really thought the computer had some type of innate ability to autonomously see and connect to other devices by pointing the monitor in a certain direction. I couldn't let this situation be only witnessed by myself, so I give him the IT help desk number, so my co-workers could get a piece of the action. To this day it astounds me that a military officer can make his way through the ranks and still not have a basic understanding of how computers and peripherals connect on a network. Testing is for losers, by user_Sambans_. While the names have been changed to protect the guilty and some amount of poetic license employed for dramatic effect, the core facts of the following incident are completely true. I fixed it. Gerald dumped his bag on the desk and sat heavily in his chair. His expression, somehow simultaneously smug yet annoyed, portrayed the disdain he held for Carl. Gerald, the company's head of IT, was Carl's boss and, according to legend, the fountain of all IT wisdom, a highly accomplished and experienced veteran in the dark arts of the computer sciences, basically the computing equivalent to a Japanese ninja master. Carl had his doubts. So, it tested okay then? Carl inquired. Perhaps it was a bit of a cheeky question, but Carl didn't ask without good reason. Gerald's reply dripped with confidence. Didn't need to test it. Testing is for losers. He was now tapping away at his computer, seemingly too busy to talk. It took a couple of seconds for the gravity of the statement to overcome Carl's mild surprise. What do you mean, you didn't need to test it? I know it's fixed. Carl took a couple more seconds. And how do you know that? Because I fixed it. Gerald fixed a disapproving glare at Carl for a couple of seconds, before returning his gaze to his monitor. Despite the statement making no logical sense, it actually answered Carl's original question. So that's a no then, he thought to himself. While he didn't really want to continue to grill his boss, he needed one vital piece of information. So, what did you do exactly? I upgraded the BIOS, came the curt reply. Now Carl really was surprised. He tried a different tack. You do know what the original problem was, right? Didn't need to. The tapping continued. After a few seconds, Carl realized that his jaw was hanging open and his brain had frozen, utterly failing in its attempt to process the abject dearth of intelligent reasoning which had just been ungracefully dumped on him. He really couldn't think of anything which adequately summed up his thoughts at this point, but managed to utter a token reply. Well, Carl paused, still gathering his wits, I guess we'll wait and see how it goes. Don't need to wait, Gerald stood and walked briskly away from his desk, calling back over his shoulder. It's fixed. Carl watched Gerald leave the room, no doubt off to some very important meeting elsewhere in the building. His brain was now physically hurting, screaming at him to seek out intelligent life, somewhere, anywhere. Maybe someone on the internet? Perhaps he could find a random stranger on the street? Could the potted plant in the corner be of some assistance? He just needed some semblance of cohesive thought to quell the pain of a logic that was currently raging genocidal warfare on millions of his brain cells. Carl studied the potted plant critically. He imagined that at this point it had a pretty decent chance of giving Gerald a real run for his money. Right. Carl thought to himself, summing up his conversation with Gerald, you don't know what the original issue was, applied some arbitrary fix, which, let's be brutally honest here, has only a slightly higher probability of working than a barbecue in an Arctic snowstorm. Furthermore, you didn't test it, and you don't intend to monitor the situation to confirm that your fix worked. Carl paused to consider the facts. Seems like a winning formula to me. Now Carl wasn't just your average IT engineer. He had been in the industry for over 2 decades and had seen a lot of frontline action. He had worked his way up the ranks to his current senior IT team leader position by pure, hard grind. Troubleshooting was Carl's bread and butter, and he was often called upon to resolve issues that the rest of the team were unable to make any headway on. In short, he knew what he was doing. The particular problem in question had already been escalated to Carl some time earlier by the engineering team, and Carl himself had spent dozens of hours systematically trying to determine the cause of the issue. After running through all apparent possibilities twice and still finding no solution, Carl knew that it was time for another set of eyes. Either he had missed something, or had made a misdiagnosis at some point in the process. A few days ago, as Gerald was away at the time, Carl had gone to Tony, Gerald's boss, to discuss the situation. Tony was the owner of the company, an ex-rugby old boy and lager aficionado. He didn't have any technical expertise, but what he lacked on this front he made up for in his ability to consume alcohol. Why don't you get Gerald to take a look? Tony blathered, beer in hand. It was only 2 p.m., but Tony liked to start the evening early. Carl barely managed to suppress a painful wince. I'm not sure Gerald is the right person for this job, besides, he has a heap of other things on right now. Carl tried his best to sound convincing. Nah, he'll be fine. Tony took another swig of his brew, he can spare a few minutes out of his day. Carl grimaced. Unfortunately, this is not something that's going to be resolved in a short time frame. The team have spent an age on this, and I've also spent a considerable amount of time trying to determine the source of the issue. Tony opened another beer and stifled a belch. Gerald's pretty tech-savvy, I think you might be surprised at how fast he works. Don't worry, I'll speak to him tonight about it. Okay. Thanks. Carl walked away regretting his decision to escalate the issue, but what else could he do? You never know, Carl thought to himself, maybe Gerald will find something that I've missed. What's the worst that can happen? Of course, now Carl was now starting to see the beginnings of the worst, although little did he understand the full extent of how full-blown, mentally deficient, nipple-twistingly retarded things were about to get. A few days later, Tony called Carl into his office. Carl knew that things were serious when Tony put down his beer as he entered. Carl, Tony looked serious, I have some concerns about your troubleshooting abilities. Carl was mildly shocked. Why is that? This recent issue you've been working on for some time. Tony looked Carl in the eye. Gerald's just told me he fixed it in under 2 hours and the client has confirmed that everything is now fine. For the briefest of moments Carl experienced a flash of self-doubt. But then he remembered that it was Gerald they were talking about and his confidence instantly returned. However, there was always the possibility, however infinitesimally small, that Gerald had somehow managed to actually resolve the issue. Carl frowned. Let me check that out and get back to you. Tony assented and went back to his beer as Carl returned to his desk. For the next 2 hours, Carl systematically combed the affected systems, gathering evidence of the original issue and its current status. After he had finished, Carl knew what had really happened, and had the indisputable evidence to prove it. Reviewing the results of his research, Carl kicked himself for doubting his own work for even a second. Of course Gerald hadn't fixed it, because as an engineer, Gerald was about as useful as a can opener to a school of sardines. While Gerald had indeed performed the BIOS update that he said he had, as Carl had suspected, it had absolutely nothing to do with the original issue and subsequently, as the logs revealed, had zero efficacy in resolving it. What the logs clearly showed that in the 3 days immediately after Gerald's fix there was no change to the issue, but following that there was a noticeable drop in occurrence. Curious as to the reason for the issue's recent drop in frequency, Carl investigated further. What he discovered earned him some odd looks from the other engineers as he involuntarily roared with laughter. There was one more loose end to tidy up. Carl called the affected client to inquire as to their view of the status of the issue. The client wasn't happy. Nope, the problem's still there, maybe it happens slightly less now, but it's still really ripping my underpants. Also, since that Gerald guy was here, our goddamned nightly report isn't running anymore. I got management all over my ass about this in a TPS report backlog longer and a Microsoft minute. When the hell are you guys gonna fix this thing? Carl apologized on behalf of the company and assured the client that they were doing everything they could to resolve the issue as fast as possible. Then he began compiling his report to Tony. The report outlined the fact that Gerald had not actually known what the problem was, had not bothered to check with the client as to whether his fix had been effective, and most unexpectedly of all, had not in fact resolved the issue. However, the part of the report that Carl most enjoyed writing was the one which outlined that, after having realized that his fix had not resolved the client's issue, Gerald had attempted to cover up his failure by setting the servers to automatically reboot every night. Not only had this failed to eliminate the issue and had not resolved its root cause, it had caused the client to experience other, new issues. After receiving and reading the report, Tony responded to Carl with a simple thank you. Carl felt he was entitled to some kind of apology, from either Tony or Gerald, or both, but never heard anything further on the matter. Subsequent to all this, Carl went back to looking into the problem. He eventually discovered that while his troubleshooting methodology and logic had been without fault, the issue was due to an undocumented bug in Microsoft Office which spanned 2 different versions. While Carl had swapped out the original version of Office for a newer one, it was only by changing to a 3rd version that the issue was finally resolved. As far as Carl could tell, he was the first person globally to narrow down the cause of the issue. Not long after all this happened, Carl was let go because management wanted to hire more staff in a different area of the business. Carl now works as a freelance IT consultant, troubleshooting major issues for clients and giving strategic advice, and is earning 2.5 times what his old company were paying him. Sometimes Carl wonders how Gerald is doing with his latest troubleshooting efforts. However, he doesn't wonder long, because he already knows.